May 20, 1927. A skinny pilot climbs into a tiny plane. No co-pilot. No parachute. Just sandwiches and a dream. Everyone said it was suicide. The Atlantic Ocean had already claimed 6 lives trying this, but Lindbergh had a secret plan nobody knew about. He'd stay awake using the craziest method you've ever heard. 33 hours. 1 engine. 0 room for error, and halfway across, something went terribly wrong. What he did next changed aviation forever. Charles Lindbergh stared at a map in 1927. The Atlantic Ocean stretched 3,600 miles wide. 6 pilots had already died trying to cross it alone, but a prize waited. $25,000 for the first solo flight. Lindbergh was just a male pilot. Unknown. Broke. Only 25 years old. Everyone laughed at him. They called him the Flying Fool. Big companies had teams of engineers. Expensive planes. Backup systems. Lindbergh had none of that. He scraped together money from small-town businessmen. His plan seemed insane. 1 engine. 1 seat. No radio. No parachute either. Why would he refuse a parachute on the most dangerous flight ever attempted? The answer reveals something shocking about his tiny plane. He named it Spirit of St. Louis. It had a fatal design flaw, but Lindbergh knew something others didn't. A trick that might keep him alive. The question was simple. Could one man defeat an ocean that had killed everyone who tried? The Spirit of St. Louis looked nothing like normal planes. Lindbergh made a crazy decision. He removed everything heavy. No radio to call for help. No sextant to navigate properly. He even cut his maps in half. Of the fuel tanks filled the entire front of the plane. This created a deadly problem. Lindbergh couldn't see forward at all. 0 forward visibility. He had to look out the side windows to fly. Imagine driving a car blindfolded from New York to Paris. That's what he faced. The plane carried 450 gallons of gasoline. It weighed more than the plane itself. 1 spark and he'd become a fireball over the Atlantic. Engineers warned him. The plane was too heavy to take off safely. If he crashed on takeoff, the fuel would explode instantly. That's why he refused a parachute. It was completely useless anyway. The plane was so stuffed with fuel, he couldn't jump out even if he wanted to. He was trapped inside a flying bomb. And he knew it. May 20, 1927. Roosevelt Field, New York. Rain poured down. The runway turned to mud. Lindbergh's plane sat at the end. Overloaded. Dangerous. Possibly doomed. Every expert told him to wait. The weather was terrible over the ocean. He ignored them all. The engine roared to life at 7:52 a.m. The plane started rolling. Slow. Very slow. Too slow. It bounced through puddles. The wheels sank into soft ground. Telephone wires waited at the runway's end. The plane wasn't lifting. Photographers watched through their cameras. They expected to film a disaster. The plane used every single foot of runway at the last possible second. The wheels left the ground. He cleared the telephone wires by just 20 feet. Maybe less. 1 witness said he saw the wheels clip the wires. Others said no. Lindbergh himself never knew how close he came to dying in that first minute, but now came the real test. 33 hours over an ocean that killed everyone before him. Hour 5. Lindbergh flew into thick fog. He couldn't see the ocean below. Couldn't see the sky above, just gray emptiness in every direction. His instruments were basic. A compass. An altimeter. That's almost it. 1 wrong turn and he'd fly in circles until the fuel ran out. He'd packed 5 sandwiches for the trip. He ate one. But something worse than hunger started creeping in. Sleep. His eyes began closing. His head dropped forward. He slapped his own face. Hard. It didn't work for long. Hour 10 arrived. The sleepiness got worse. Much worse. He'd been awake for 23 hours before the flight even started. Now his body screamed for rest. His eyelids felt like anchors. If he fell asleep for even 30 seconds, the plane would spiral into the ocean. So Lindbergh did something extreme. Something painful. He opened the side window. Freezing air blasted his face at 100 miles per hour. It helped. But only for a little while. Hour 15. Halfway across the Atlantic, Lindbergh noticed something strange. Ghosts appeared in the cockpit. Transparent figures sitting behind him. They spoke to him. Gave him advice about navigation. He turned around. Nobody there. He looked forward. They appeared again, these weren't dreams. He was awake. Flying. But his mind was breaking. Sleep deprivation creates hallucinations. Lindbergh knew this. But he couldn't stop them. The ghosts felt real. They seemed friendly. Almost helpful. Then the ice came. Ice formed on the wings. Heavy ice. Deadly ice. Ice changes how air flows over a wing. Too much ice and the plane falls. He couldn't see the wings in the darkness. He only felt the plane getting sluggish. Should he fly higher above the clouds? Or lower toward the warmer ocean air? One choice might save him. The other would kill him. He had no radio. No weather reports. No help from anyone, just his failing brain and a plane covered in ice somewhere over the black Atlantic. Hour 20. The storms arrived. Lightning flashed around him. Thunder shook the tiny plane. Rain hammered the windscreen. He flew blind through the darkness. The compass spun wildly. Was he still heading east? Or had he turned in circles? One storm cell forced him down. Lower. Lower. Dangerously low. He could see the ocean waves below now. Giant waves. Angry waves. They reached up toward his wheels like hands trying to grab him. 20 feet above the water. Then 10 feet. One mistake and he'd cartwheel into the sea. The wind threw his plane sideways. He fought the controls. His arms ached. His entire body hurt. His mind begged him to quit. Just land on the water. His brain whispered. Rest. Sleep. Give up. Ships sailed below. He could ditch near one. Maybe they'd rescue him, but Lindbergh made a decision. He pulled back on the stick. The plane climbed. Back into the storm. Back into the nightmare. He'd rather die trying than quit 500 miles from Europe. Hour 27. Something appeared ahead, dark shapes on the horizon. Lindbergh leaned forward. He rubbed his burning eyes. Land? Or another hallucination? He couldn't trust his brain anymore. The shapes grew clearer. Mountains. Real mountains. Ireland. He'd found Ireland. Emotions flooded through him. Relief. Joy. Disbelief. He'd actually crossed the Atlantic Ocean. Solo. Against every prediction, but the flight wasn't over. He still needed to reach Paris. He followed the Irish coast to England. Then across the English Channel to France. People below saw his plane. Word spread fast. The American is coming. Thousands rushed toward Paris. Le Bourget Airport filled with crowds. Lindbergh didn't know this. He thought maybe a few hundred people might show up. Hour 33. Paris appeared in the darkness below. He circled the city. Beautiful lights everywhere. But where was the airport? Then he saw it. A dark field. And something strange. Thousands of tiny lights moving like a river. Car headlights. Heading to the airport, more people than he'd ever seen in one place. All waiting for him. Lindbergh dropped toward the runway. Exhausted. Shaking. Barely conscious. The wheels touched French soil. He'd done it. 33.5 hours. Solo across the Atlantic, but what happened next shocked him more than the flight itself. The crowd broke through barriers. 150,000 people stampeded toward his plane. They lifted him from the cockpit. Carried him like a king. He tried to speak. Nobody could hear him over the screaming crowds. Of French soldiers rescued him. They smuggled him away in a car. The mob tore pieces off his plane as souvenirs. They wanted anything he'd touched. Overnight, Charles Lindbergh became the most famous person on Earth, more famous than presidents. More famous than movie stars. He received 3.5 million letters. 1,400 tons of mail. They offered him millions of dollars for endorsements. Parades in every major city, but something darker came with the fame. Something he never expected. The same fame that made him a hero eventually destroyed his private life. His baby son was kidnapped and murdered 5 years later. The crime of the century. Lindbergh spent the rest of his life running from cameras and crowds. The man who conquered the Atlantic couldn't escape what he'd become. A prisoner of his own success. Charles Lindbergh's historic solo transatlantic flight changed everything in 1927. The Spirit of St. Louis crossed the Atlantic nonstop. 33 brutal hours. Lucky Lindy became an aviation pioneer that day. The longest solo flight ever attempted, but this transatlantic crossing came with a price he never expected. Fame destroyed the privacy he desperately wanted. One man conquered an ocean. But he could never escape what came after, the first solo flight across the Atlantic. A triumph. And a curse.